Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first conversation circle of Food History Weekend 2023. My name is Paula Johnson. I'm the curator of food history and leader of the food history team here at the National Museum of American History. And it's so wonderful to be here with all of you in person and online. Thank you so much for coming out and for supporting this program. As we were developing this program, we wanted to hear about the people who are on the ground for World Central Kitchen, who are on the ground around the globe, bringing food and aid to people whose lives have been upended by severe natural disasters. You'll hear about their work and are very grateful for their presence. In fact, just 24 hours ago, Chef Molly was in Armenia, and we're very grateful that she's here joining us for this conversation today. Before we dive in, I want to say that this program received federal support from the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative Pool, which is administered by the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum, one of the new museums that will be joining us here in Washington, D.C. We're very grateful for their support of this program. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague Magdalena Mieri, who is the director of the museum's program in Latino history and culture. She's been with the museum for many years and will be leading the conversation with two amazing women, Molly Kaufman and Laura Hayes, from World Central Kitchen, the organization founded, of course, by our inspiring and dynamic friend of the museum, Chef Jose Andres. So please join me in welcoming Magdalena, Molly, and Laura to the program.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Paula, for the introduction, and thank you for joining us for this fantastic and very timely conversation, Feeding Communities in Crisis with World Central Kitchen, one of my favorite humanitarian organizations. The organization is actively helping mitigate climate change's disasters' impact on communities across the world by feeding them. What a beautiful mission. Welcome, Magdalena Mieri, Director of the Latino Program in the museum. And before we begin the conversation, a few housekeeping notes. This conversation circle is 1 hour long program, and we encourage audience participation by asking questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and one of my colleagues will pass on the microphone to you. For those of you on social media, please tag the museum at History Museum, and please include hashtag Smithsonian Food or hashtag Smithsonian Women's History. Thank you. And now to our program. With me today are two fabulous women who are making a difference, Chef Molly Kaufman and Chef Corps Manager Laura Hayes. Chef Molly Kaufman is a culinary operations manager at World Central Kitchen, responsible for Eastern North America and non-Spanish speaking Caribbean communities. Molly oversees a team of chefs, creates cultural appropriate menus, and assembles and runs a kitchen capable of producing thousands of meals in challenging conditions. She joined World Central Kitchen in January 2019 during the federal government shutdown, when World Central Kitchen opened a kitchen in Washington, D.C. to provide hot meals to furloughed government employees. Her chicken pot pie recipe, which became a staple during World Central Kitchen's COVID-19 response, is published in her book, The World Central Cookbook, Feeding Humanity, Feeding Hope. Molly previously served as executive chef of many popular restaurants in DC. She's also taken her culinary talent to hotel and restaurants kitchens in Scotland and Hawaii. Molly and her cuisine have been featured in the Washingtonian Top 100, the Washington City Paper, the Washington Post, and Edible DC. A native of both New Jersey and Massachusetts, Molly is a lifelong member of the hospitality industry, who graduated from University of Vermont and the Sequia Institute for Culinary Education in Grand Rapids, Michigan. In her spare time, you can find Molly at the gym, adventuring with her French bulldog, Charlie, and sometimes still online, helping out fellow chef family in the city. Welcome, Molly, and truly appreciate you flying from Armenia only a few hours ago. And now on to Chef Corps manager, Laura Hayes, who manages a global network of prominent culinary leaders known as the Chef Corps, who support World Central Kitchen's relief work. Chef Corps members help World Central Kitchen make local connections immediately following crisis, volunteer in relief kitchens, fundraise for the organization, and more. She joined World Central Kitchen after a 10-year career in food journalism, most recently serving as the food editor and Young and Hungry columnist at Washington City Paper for 6 years. She earned numerous local and national awards for her coverage of the inners of the restaurant industry and how food intersects with labor, politics, race, immigration, and the environment. Her cover story about diners with disability and accessibility in the restaurant industry was published in the Best American Food Writing 2020 anthology. She's been published in the Washington Post, and you've heard her on CNN, SiriusXM, WTOP, WMAU, Coach Nandis Show, NBC4, and Fox 5 DC. The Philadelphia native studied broadcast journalism at the Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University before pursuing a career in television news writing and production. She also spent 2 years teaching English in rural Japan and worked as a senior communications manager for the US-Japan Council for 3 years. She resides in Washington, DC. What an honor to have you both. So let's begin. I have some prepared questions, and again, I welcome comments, from the audience. As changing environments and extreme weather events such as droughts, floods, and wildfires increase in frequency and severity, the impacts on food production are expanding as well. Growers, gatherers, and producers are looking to the past and toward the future for innovative ways to address the impact of climate change and to create more sustainable and socially responsible practices for food production and distribution. We know that World Central Kitchen is all around the world, attending to communities in need, be in war zones such as Ukraine or the Gaza-Israel conflict. Today's conversation, though, is centered on World Central Kitchen actions in communities affected by natural disasters, just as the most recent horrific Hurricane Otis in Mexico's west coast. As an organization, World Central Kitchen is known for its rapid and flexible response to feed and support communities in crisis. So how do you do this? Let me begin with Laura. Can you tell us a little bit about World Central Kitchen, its origin stories, and its current mission, please?
My pleasure. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having us here today. It's an honor. World Central Kitchen was actually founded in 2010. That is when Chef Jose Andres, he went down to Haiti after a devastating earthquake, and he teamed up with some of our future WCK founders, and they went around with another NGO, as we often do, to try to learn the best way that we could support the community there. Obviously, there were a lot of takeaways, but the biggest one was that there was a significant room for improvement when it comes to emergency feeding in these situations. And then fast forward about 7 years later, when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, that was our moment. We went down there, and that's where our strategies and our values really started to take shape in terms of working shoulder to shoulder with local communities as we figured out how to feed an island. And so since these two kind of watershed moments, our goal has emerged to be first to the front lines after natural disasters, humanitarian crises, community crises. And we work with the urgency of now, is what Jose calls it. Speed is very important to us. When people are hungry, they're hungry immediately. And the meals that we serve, we make sure that they are culturally appropriate, nourishing, and served with as much dignity as possible. The dignity piece is a really one that I saw when I was doing a training course to get ready to work at World Central Kitchen, and they had me, it was a test to see if we could make this giant paella, as we often do, and I was in the corner, and my job was to carefully, finely chop all of these herbs. And I'm like, why are we chopping herbs in this emergency situation? And that is how serious chefs like Molly take the dignity piece of this. And so we really believe that hope and comfort come from food, and that is our main goal. And then since we got started, we have actually served more than 300 million meals around the world.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you, thank you. Let's pivot a little bit to the personal, and I'd like to start with you, Molly. Can you tell us what you do at World Central Kitchen?
Thank you again. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is definitely a bucket list moment for Laura and I. What I do at World Central Kitchen, I orchestrate, to be quite frank. I figure out how to make kitchens and feed people like ground zero on their most awful days of their lives. Pretty normally, it is when their houses are gone, their loved ones are hurt or in the hospital, their memories are washed away from floodwaters or buried in earthquakes. So I more or less try to bring them a very small piece of comfort and hope on their worst day. To get a little bit more technical, I assist in physically building kitchens in the middle of rubble, floodwaters, fires, and things of that nature, because we believe that we need to be the first to the front lines, and we want to be in the middle of where the disaster has struck so that we can quickly pivot and get to everybody possible. I work with local chefs, many of them Laura has found and worked with and knows through our chef course, so that all of the menus that we prepare are culturally appropriate to everybody that we serve. The American palate is just that, the American palate. Much of the food around the world is very, very different, and in a time of comfort, you want to eat what you know best. You don't want to eat foreign, and you don't want to eat something that may cause any more stress to your system, so we make sure that all of our food is culturally appropriate, and we also try to source it as locally as possible. So one of the other big things that WCK does during a time of crisis is we also try to jumpstart the economy as best we can. So if that means going to local farmers, looking at supermarket supply chain to see if electricity is down and refrigeration is going, if there is a bunch of meat or a bunch of produce that's going to go bad, we figure out how to make sure that we can use it before it is lost. So that's also something that I do, and it is not just me. I work with a team. It really has to do with the fact of people showing up in a time of crisis and showing up for their country or their community, because that's really how we get it going.
Thank you. And now on to you, Laura. You had a long career in journalism. What made you pivot to focus on World Central Kitchen mission?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, you hit some of my career highlights, but yeah, I really kind of covered the innards of the restaurant industry, what's going on behind the scenes, and how food intersects with everything else in society. But, I also had to write restaurant reviews and roundups and things like that, and, eventually I wanted a career that was more about the food for the many than about the food for the few, really. And I was fortunate that I got to write a couple stories about World Central Kitchen. The biggest one in print was actually a profile of Molly when she was leading the charge at Nats Park, which was our COVID response here in DC. So I followed her around that huge ballpark where she was using these massive tilt skillets and making that chicken pot pie, and just her passion was palpable, and the scale of it was so incredible, and I knew that that food was going to my neighbors in need during a really, really scary first months of the pandemic. And so I put a pin in it that if the perfect job ever opened up, that I would jump on it, and I kind of built this job. So that was fun, and there's some skills that translate, so I'm vetting and interviewing these chefs to make sure that, we're aligning ourselves with the right people. I'm helping to share their stories. I'm working with them on deadline when I'm liaising with them during these emergency situations. So my journalist heart is still very, very full. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, thank you. You both refer to teams. the two, that's impossible to do this work alone, of course. So could you talk a little bit about your teams, how you put together, how many people, what are the skills, how much you draw from the local communities that you're in or you fly in from other places?
Sure. I can associate WCK work with restaurant work. It is a team sport. That is a quote that I stand by very, very wholeheartedly. No one person can do what we do. It takes a team, a very dedicated team. I personally am a member of the East Coast Relief Team, so my section covers all of the East Coast and non-Spanish speaking Caribbean. There is myself. I have a prologue manager who more or less gets me and the team whatever we need, whether it's food or non-food items. So that could be a truckload full of vegetables or a truckload full of porta potties. You name it, we kind of get it. So it just depends upon what it is. I also have a community outreach manager who their job is to go out into the community to find the people, to speak to the local governments and the other NGOs and see what they're doing and make sure that nobody is duplicating efforts and to make sure that we can work together as best we can. And then I also have a distribution manager whose sole purpose is to figure out the best way to get the food and other things to the people. So whether that is via car, helicopter, boat, ATV, most recently in Morocco, donkey. When I was in the Dominican Republic last year, we did it via horse. There really is no limitation to how we will get food to the people. Jose does not believe in barriers, and it is something that we all strive to believe in, is that if there is a will, there is a way, and we will figure it out.
Thank you. That takes such an amazing drive from everybody.
Thank you.
Seems everybody working at World Central Kitchen is very committed to the mission. It's really a work of love. And how about you, Laura? What about the teams? Who do you interact with?
I might pass this back to Molly a little bit, but the World Central Kitchen is still like a relatively small organization that has to kind of flex when we're responding to multiple things at once, and we do that through building out her team, which includes contractors that we bring in, but also Molly and the rest of the team members she mentioned, our community outreach, our distribution person, they're hiring locally on the go. And that is like exactly like the magic of World Central Kitchen, that we are working side by side with locals. And so you know, they know what they need, they know what they want to eat, they give us their grandmother's recipes. They help us kind of understand, you know, when it's time to leave, which is also a very important decision. You know, I can delve into the chef corps a little bit now, but that they help us flex up a little bit during emergency responses. If we need extra hands in the kitchen, they will come in to volunteer. But Molly, maybe you can talk a little bit more about how specifically, like on the ground, how you find people and build that out more.
Sure, yeah, sure. I would say most recently I've just been in Armenia, which maybe some of you know and some of you don't, has been having a refugee crisis, if you will, within the country. And the best way to explain how we are able to find people on the ground is it is the people that show up from day one. Kind of like Laura said, it is the people that know the area, that have the connections, who may have had a restaurant at that point in time, may have had a shipping company or something, or knows the mayor of each and every town, or knows the mayor's brother of each and every town. But there really is no connection that is too small that we will not work with and dive into getting as much local information as possible, from translators to drivers to distribution people who live in the areas that are affected, because they know all the information that we don't. All of the information will always come from the ground and come from the people which are affected, and those end up being your most valuable resource. It is the people that show up from day one and just keep showing up over and over again. Like Laura also said, you know, from a food aspect, it is everything that they know about food for their culture. It is them teaching WCK the recipes, but then it ends up being WCK teaching them how to scale. I cannot say how many times I have worked with different cultures, different groups, different age brackets. And, you know, I say, hey, by the end of the week, we're going to make 5,000 meals. And they look at me with this wide-eyed look like, I haven't made 500 meals. How am I supposed to make 5,000 meals? And I look them in the face and I say, I promise you we're going to get there, and we're going to get there together. And then when we get to 5,000 meals, they're like, we're here. I want to do 10,000 meals. Let's get to 10,000 meals. And then, you know, the drive and the spark just continues on and continues on. And again, the recipes are from families, and then the families show up. And then sometimes you have grandma show up who's actually recipe you're making, and you get told it's wrong. And then she takes the reins, and then you're like, okay, well, grandma's in charge. And then you have 75 grandmas in charge. And then you're actually making the right thing. So that's really how it kind of grows from building a kitchen to making 10,000 meals. Those are, I guess, a few of the steps from A to Z.
Thank you, thank you. That's just fascinating. So you are talking about how you are out in communities and working side by side. I wonder what innovations have you been able to bring back, perhaps, to World Central Kitchen, or learn lessons that you can apply as you continue to go out in the field?
So some things that we have applied kind of from the earlier days and into now is the fact that we have food standards. A lot of us came from restaurant backgrounds and believe, you know, that we all hold standards to food and how hot it should be and how it should be cooked, and we don't believe that our standards should fall just because there is a disaster or we are lacking in modern day cooking apparatus. Most of the time, we really are just cooking with fire and propane and gas and very large pots and pans. It really doesn't get any fancier than that. We are lucky sometimes in which we get to work with catering companies or restaurant partners or chef corps members that have big fancy kitchens that have all the bells and whistles. But during a time of disaster, most of the time when the electricity doesn't work, those bells and whistles kind of go by the wayside, and you really just need to focus on the fact that you have fire in a pot. And they did it thousands of years ago, and it still pretty much works today. Some of the standards that we hold ourselves to, as well as our restaurant partners or catering companies, chef corps members, are amounts of food, the size of the meal, because that meal may be the only meal that this person or group of people get all day, so we want to make sure it's substantial. We want to make sure it's culturally and religiously appropriate, depending upon where we are. We want to make sure that it is hot held and temperature appropriate so that nobody ever gets sick. And we also want to make sure that the food is comforting and that it is served with dignity and respect, because we are all serving human beings, and during a time of crisis, those are the two best things you can show, is dignity and respect.
Thank you.
So Molly mentioned restaurant partners. So there's just kind of two big buckets in how we get meals out after disasters. The first is by, you know, doing the cooking ourselves, commandeering an elementary school cafeteria, building a kitchen out of mud in Madagascar, which she did. But then sometimes we also work with restaurants, caterers, and food trucks as partners, again, giving them those culinary standards so that they can be successful, and monitoring them every step of the way to make sure they're meeting those standards, and we're coaching them. But the one that, within this group, I'm very passionate about food trucks. Food trucks are kind of one of our superpowers. And this isn't totally a new innovation, because we started using them in Hurricane Maria back in 2017, but we've really kind of grown how we work with them. So if you think about it, they really are the perfect emergency feeding vehicle. We can send them directly to where the need is the greatest. They often don't have the same fuel needs as a brick and mortar restaurant, which, you know, may not have power. And then, you know, a lot of food trucks are small businesses that are owned by BIPOC and women, which are the sorts of businesses that we like to support. You know, certainly being a WCK restaurant partner isn't this like enormous cash grab, but, you know, we are compensating them per meal, and, you know, making it worth their efforts, and mostly they're in it to support their neighbors and gently kind of stimulate the economy to start recovering as well. But yeah, food trucks are amazing, and I think, you know, during the pandemic, we saw a lot of downtowns hollow out, like the traditional food truck audience, where people would come to those busy squares downtown, hit their favorite food truck. they kind of figured out we need to go to where the people are, so they would go out into neighborhoods. And so I just see this really not exciting, that's a terrible choice of word, a really special opportunity for food trucks to play a bigger role in emergency response. And as there are more and more disasters around the world, they're just incredibly important to us, especially during the first 72 hours of a response. Just to give you an idea of scale, so for Hurricane Ian that hit Florida in October of 2022, I was down there helping make this happen, which was wild. So Molly had a kitchen. She was making about 15,000 meals a day out of the facility in Fort Myers where the Minnesota Twins do their spring training. But we had to cover, that was a huge storm, so we had to cover from like Tampa down to Fort Myers, and so we also had to call upon about 55 food trucks. And they got the job done. Many of them, we kind of saved their information. We just used some of them again for Hurricane Hillary. Idalia, 2 hurricanes, 2 weeks. Hurricane Idalia in Florida. And then we've recently built out a team whose job it is to kind of proactively find food trucks around the country and kind of prepare them and pre-vet them so that they're ready to go even faster, similar to the proactive work I'm doing with our Chef Corps, which I'll get to shortly. But I'm really into food trucks and how helpful they've been to us. And these food truck operators are just such incredible people with great stories as well.
That's wonderful. So that's my next question was going to be how do you adapt the model, World Central Kitchen model to the communities, but you're already talking about that. So I wonder how you decide on the meals, what to cook. What's your process?
To be honest, we don't decide. We poll. We poll the community. We poll the people who are coming to help us, and we say, what do you want on your worst day? What is the most comforting meal that you can give to your family? What do your children want when they are sick? What makes you happy? What makes you smile? And what brings you joy? And most of the time, it is as simple as a starch, a vegetable, and a protein cooked with the spices and the flavors of that area, served with either fruit or bread, depending upon, obviously, culture, religion, and all of those things. But that is really how we decide. We don't go trudging in there, we're from the U.S. and we know better. We know nothing in the end. We are there to listen to the people and serve them exactly what they want, what is going to make them happy, feel comforted, and we do try for the most part to be nutritious. I am kind of one of those chefs that believes that you should see some sort of a vegetable, even if I'm hiding it in your spaghetti with, chopped up spinach and collard greens. When we were in Kentucky for the second time in 2022, that we were in a community that was very starch and meat heavy. They weren't super big on their vegetables, but I figured out a way to sneak collard greens into their spaghetti, and most of them had never seen a green in their spaghetti, and now that's just how they do it because they are like, oh, I can eat a vegetable.
Making lots of soup beans and cornbread.
Yes, yes, awesome. Lots of soup beans, cornbread, all of that stuff. But there is always a world where you can sneak a vegetable in and just make it a little bit more nutritious and still keep people happy.
We have, so one of the roles of the Chef Corps is to help us best serve the local community, and that extends to kind of the menu planning. And so I think about that a lot when I'm building this network. And so for example, we have this awesome chef. They're not all restaurant chefs, these Chef Corps members. We have this chef who is in charge of the kitchen at a huge hospital in Anchorage, Alaska, that is specifically for all of the Native and Indigenous people to come and get their serious medical care. There's about 256 different tribes in Alaska, and they all eat different things, different ingredients. One might eat seal soup, one might not eat seal soup. And it is this incredible woman's job to know what all 256 of these tribes eat in their moment a comfort, right? Because they're all at the hospital for a big reason. And so I look for people with these like secret powers because, you know, should we ever need to respond to like a remote part of Alaska, we can call Amy Foote is her name, she's incredible. We can call Amy and say, okay, like work with Chef Molly and tell us, you know, what we should make so that, you know, these meals are exactly what they are craving. Yeah, a lot of thought goes into it. I think that's why I wanted to work here is, you know, that these meals are really special, chef prepared, and just so tuned into local ingredients and proteins, et cetera. Another way that we use our chef corps is, you know, restaurants have very, very diverse staff. So while the executive chef may be the person in the chef corps, you know, he or she has a team that could live in all different neighborhoods in that city, right? So we could call upon that chef corps member to say, you know, which neighborhoods do you think that we might need to serve a special meal? Like, do we need to serve halal there, or should we not serve pork in this neighborhood? You know, they also know, you know, where people live, where their staff live, who may not want to come to a government-run shelter, for example, so they can also help us find those unmet pockets of need. So they're kind of really our expert local liaisons, both in terms of finding that need and then also making sure those meals are appropriate.
Thank you. So unfortunately, in this day and time of climate change, so many disasters, more and more frequently, I wonder if you can speak to how you're growing the organization, how you're growing capacities and expanding. Either one of you.
So we use a fair amount of contractors, and we have a network of contractors that now really is spanning the globe. These are people who have either cooking experience or some sort of hospitality experience. We also have a number of volunteers who just, you know, they just keep coming back and they know the way, and eventually they're running plating lines and doing distribution charts and working with chef corps members and things like that. So we are able to really do what we do because we have such a large contractor network. That is how I started. I can attest to that is how the majority of most of the chefs in WCK who are full-time now started, and that is really how we are able to make things go so quickly, other than obviously using locals and all of that local knowledge. But sometimes when the crisis is a bit too great and we really want to go fast, it's best to have people around you who understand how to go fast and understand how to get things going in such a quick manner. So we are able to call upon our contractors who have worked in all of the different areas of WCK to come assist us during times of crisis. So we really do try to geographically bring in people who are closest because, as Laura says, working with the quickness of now.
Urgency of
now. Sorry, my jet lag of now is really starting to set in. The urgency of now means that a shorter plane flight means more boots on the ground quickly to get it going.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Go
so similarly, so I am just working with great ferocity to build out our chef corps because, these natural disasters are happening much more frequently. You know, we used to have a defined hurricane and fire season, and now it's, and areas that we knew to expect disasters. Last year, I don't think we expected one Hurricane Fiona, to take out 5 places, the last of which was Nova Scotia. So we have places that are not prepared for emergencies like this. And so I really have to cover the globe. There are currently about 370 chef corps members, and just a little bit of background on kind of the genesis behind this idea. So chefs are a lot of things, but they are often the most trusted and connected people in their communities. They always know a guy knows a guy who has exactly what we need. You know, every emergency is different, but we could be looking for food suppliers, places to store equipment, where the heck is the propane in this town, what are your 5 favorite food trucks, just anything that we can use to get cooking a lot faster, and so that Molly has to make less cold calls is kind of the goal there. So that's the kind of main role and responsibility of the Chef Corps, but they also volunteer in our relief kitchens, fundraise, speak at events, etc. So I need more of them. I'm currently hiring someone to help me expand the Chef Corps in especially Spanish-speaking regions of the world. But yeah, just expanding that capacity will really help us be more nimble around the world and get cooking a lot faster and better serve the local community.
Wonderful, thank you. Before transition, yes, go ahead. Yes, of course. Hold on a second to get the microphone since we are streaming. Everybody can hear you.
Hi.
Hopefully, yes. Hi, my name is Isabel. I'm actually from Puerto Rico.
Hi.
And I was there in Hurricane Maria, 2017. Certainly saw all the networking and the volunteers, and I think you did an amazing job. And certainly you've grown as you say you're thinking about the world. And initially you said that after Hurricane Maria, I'm guessing you guys looked at what was gone, what worked, what didn't. And I'm interested to know, what were the top 3 or top 5 things that you said as an organization, if we want to continue to grow, these are some of the things that we need to figure out.
That predated both of us, so neither of us were there, but it was like such a seminal moment in World Central Kitchen history that really is where, I think the biggest takeaway was the working shoulder to shoulder with locals. Like, there was no way that we were going to be an organization that just swooped in from above with our people and our food, right? Like, that was where we learned to work with local food truck operators. That's also where we learned an important lesson. I think Jose says that everyone and everything is part of WCK. They just don't know it yet. As we were turning stadiums into restaurants. Jose believes that anything can be used for emergency feeding, which is obviously something we carried through and used after Hurricane Ian in Florida with that training facility and then Nats Park. But yeah, I think that is just really where we let locals lead the way. That was probably the biggest one. I can't speak to things like what we learned about supply chain management because I wasn't there yet, neither was Molly. But do you have anything to kind of add?
I can speak to a little bit about semi-supply chain and also management and whatnot. I think that was also the pivoting point where WCK truly believed that we have no boundaries, that we will do anything to get food to the people. I think for those who may have seen the documentary, We Feed People, Jose does not believe in turning a blind eye to anything or anyone. Money is really not an object to him. We will make it happen. We will figure it out. And I think that Puerto Rico was one of those times where it was, we will figure it out. And he was determined. And that just brought on more determination of WCK that no matter what, we will figure it out.
Maps. That's another one. That is where we...
Very true.
Yes,
maps.
That is where we fell in love with maps, so much so that we now have a map specialist on staff. But that's really where that came out of because we literally, as you know, had to feed the whole island. And so we just had to really precisely decide where we placed those kitchens so that we could reach as many people as efficiently as possible and make sure that our food was still safe by the time we got it to where it needed to go. So maps were really critical to that operation. And now we even have partnerships with NASA to make sure our maps are just top notch. So yeah, that really, truly is where we kind of solidified all of our values. And that's a great question. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Is there a question in the back? All right. I think in the back and then next to you.
While we're getting the mic up here, I will say I think I see a Chef Corps member in the audience. Matt Adler of Caruso's Grocery. Can you raise your hand, please, sir?
Yes, please.
Matt's amazing. He's cooked with us all over the world. Was Molly's right-hand man at Nats Park. Also was one of the first people to go to Japan when we were feeding people in the Carnival cruise ship that was docked out of Yokohama before we knew what COVID really was. So Matt's amazing, and now he's in a really great kind of leadership role within the Chef Corps, and I'm just really happy to see you here today, buddy. All right, sorry, yes, hi.
Hi.
Hi. So I have a comment and also a question. So my comment is that my $10 a month is very well spent. It's a recurring donation. I encourage everyone to. It is one of my favorite charities. And also, Jose Andres has a lot of lovely restaurants in DC. I'm a Smithsonian volunteer, and I recommend them all the time, even though we're not supposed to. My question is. When Ukraine was invaded and there was a lot of refugees and they were at these train stations, there was, I remember there was a bombing and some of your volunteers were killed. And so I'm wondering how you balance your mission along with safety of these, I think it was volunteers were killed. It might have been staff, so that's my question.
So safety we take very, very seriously. Obviously, we go into some places that most people do not. We have a chief security officer where his sole job is to do the pre-foot work, sometimes even going ahead of us to make sure that we are safe, the people we are going to be working with is safe, and the location in which we are in is going to be safe. So safety is probably of the top two things that we take into consideration when we are going somewhere. So it is something that is of the most importance to the organization. I'm hoping that answered your question.
Yeah, and we're obviously hoping that never happens again. We think about them. I mean, they're everyone who supported our Ukraine operation, which is now we've been there since the beginning, and we're committed for many more months. And the people that are on the ground for us, most of them Ukrainian at this point, was our Ukraine response, just kind of big picture, started outside of Ukraine and all the surrounding countries, the biggest of which was a giant warehouse kitchen in Przemyśl, Poland, but also other surrounding countries. And then kind of as migration patterns changed and Ukrainians were going back to their liberated towns, or they were just going back because they wanted to be home, we kind of shifted our operations to primarily working with Ukrainian restaurant partners within Ukraine. So the whole thing has been, a tremendous learning experience. But I just wanted to say just a brief word and a thanks to all of our Ukrainian volunteers and staff who have just served their communities with such bravery over the past year and 3/4 at this point. So thank you for the question. Yep.
Question here and then here.
Good afternoon. My name is Betty. Happen to also be from Puerto Rico. I'm going to take us in a different direction. I'm so fascinated by the work that you're doing and the talent that you have in your team. When you began out of the sense of urgency and doing right, you have become this very sophisticated operation now. When you gave the example of being on the ground and having to figure out the local food, the culture, the needs, that is simpler to understand than it is the local politics and how much you have to trust your life and what the sources that you're using to feed the community. So the example of Amy from Anchorage, who are those people that are helping you avoid the landmines of the local political scene? I know for Puerto Rico, there were a few of those gaffes, right? There were, because our politics are so complicated, that local mayor may have a different agenda than your organization. Help us understand some of those politics.
I mean, the easiest answer, I'm not sure how much more we'll get into it than this, is that we feed people. We feed everyone, no matter what. Just whoever needs meals, we're going to get them to them. And, we aren't the most polite organization in terms of waiting for the government to give us all of the.
Oh, we don't wait.
We don't wait.
So
We just feed people. There was I shouldn't tell the story. There was last year. I was the same hurricane that swung up and hit Nova Scotia, also hit Turks and Caicos, and I don't think I'm allowed there. So there goes that vacation, because my job was to keep checking in with their government leaders, and we said, just, is the airport open? No. Okay, I'm telling them, as soon as we get word that the airport is open, we're landing our planes and we're feeding people. And they're like, we will let you know when you can come. Airport open, we landed our planes. She called my bluff. So a few hours later, there was photos on social media of our food in people's hands. So I got quite a phone call or two. And then what happens is, in about 24 hours later, I got a different kind of phone call. And that phone call was, okay, we have these 6 distribution sites. Your food is incredible. We need this many meals. Thank you so much. So we just... Again, urgency of now. We are a non-political organization, so we do feed everybody, and we do work very closely with local governments. We join these calls that other feeding organizations join, like Operation Barbecue, the Cajun Navy. Both of them are a hoot. Recommend checking them out. But we all make sure we're not duplicating efforts. So there is coordination there, but. We feed everybody, and we feed them no matter what.
And most recently, one of our largest operations activations to date during when there was the massive earthquakes in Turkey. Some similar phone calls were had because all of the regions obviously have different political groups, different mayors, different governors. There was a very large election that was due to happen. We landed. Jose was actually there first.
That helps usually.
Yep, it kind of helps that he's there first. But again, we don't always necessarily listen to what politicians have to say. We very much also like to work with other local NGOs, some of which are similar, Operation Barbecue and the Team Rubicon. We really like to share information, because odds are, if we're all receiving the same information, or we're all receiving the wrong information or different information, we can track it back to where it's been. But like Laura said, we are a non-politically, a group. We just feed the people, and that's all we're there to do. We're not there to push anybody's agenda. We are not there to help anybody's campaign. We are there to feed the people. And normally, after about a month or so, we do get the phone calls that are like, okay, we're sorry that we didn't play nicely in the sandbox with you, but can you please continue to help us? And the answer is always a resounding yes. We have yet to ever say no.
How do you determine how long are you physically in the community, and it's time for you to leave and have left an infrastructure or a know-how in place?
Sure. With natural disasters, we have what we call a lot of indicators that we try to look for in areas where disaster has struck. A lot of the times it has to do with electricity. Once electricity starts coming on, grocery stores start opening, restaurants start opening, because the other thing is that we don't want to be competing with anybody. We don't want to be taking any business away from the local economy. We also don't want to create a significant need. We don't want people to have to rely on us for the long haul, because we have found that that can cause a large economic issue. So once we start seeing that the lights are on, that potable water is running, grocery stores are open, restaurants are open, sometimes when school is back in session, those then become some indicators that it is time for us to start to either lessen our numbers, look to see how we can partner with other groups locally, see if there is a transitional phase that we can have. One of the biggest things that we have found works once hot meals are not needed is doing product and produce boxes. We have done those by way of a distribution model. We have done them by doing local farmers markets, which most recently we have done in Hawaii, and we also have done it in Kentucky. But yeah, we have found that a way for normalcy to return to people is they want to cook for themselves. They want to have they want to have a meaning in their own current state, and that cooking a lot of the time brings back that feeling. So.
Thank you. Do you want to add to that?
No, Molly nailed it. Yeah, and it's not just when grocery stores reopen, it's when they are open and their prices have normalized a bit. So, we'll do a lot of calling around and asking about, the cost of eggs or milk or whatever. And I'm very, very proud of how innovative World Central Kitchen is when it comes to that taper off and some of the solutions that we've found to help people get cooking again. One that's just is my favorite thing that we've done this year in Ukraine. Most of Ukrainian families like to grow their own food. It is such a deeply ingrained part of their culture. If you look at their flag, it's like the golden wheat fields and the blue sky. And so, when people left their homes and left Ukraine, this land was dormant. No one was planting it. And we wanted to kind of, as people returned home after their towns were liberated, we wanted to kind of help them get growing again. So we had this program called Seeds of Hope. I think we gave out about 165,000 seed kits that Ukrainian families could plant. And Jose was actually just back in Ukraine, at the harvest season from these seed kits, and was going around, and people were showing him their cucumbers and their beets and every other vegetable you need to make borscht. And so I just, we're most known for our hot meals, and that will always be, our bread and butter. But it's really cool to see my colleagues innovate on the fly in the field.
Thank you. Do we have more questions?
Hi.
Yes.
Just one.
Back there and then first row.
Hi.
Yes.
Hi, just a quick one. I work with a local disaster preparedness group right here in Southwest DC. My question is about I know you guys are extremely busy around the world, and it's extraordinary what you're doing. We all support you, I think. You probably don't have a whole lot of time for preparedness. To what extent do you, well, you certainly touched on it, and maybe I'm wrong. You do work preparing with the chef group. So, but you're familiar with that term, the VOAD. In each state, some are very, very advanced, some are not so advanced, but there are coalitions of other voluntary agencies trying to get disaster feeding plans in place, with the government. And it's a lot of work, but just wondering, to what extent are you guys able, with all of your expertise, to help change the model, frankly? There was a kind of a traditional feeding model for disasters that might be slightly out of date. So I think all the more we need you at the table in the planning part.
I can speak at least to the VOAD calls, and yes, they do definitely differ from state to state. We've been on a few that are a bit more advanced, and a few that are in need of some advancement, if you will. For preparedness, that's all we really think about. We just think about how we can do it better from the jump. Whether that is information sharing on the VOAD calls, we think that those are pretty important to be on, and we do try to that there is hopefully a WCK representative from the ground team on those calls, because really the information sharing is what gets us to the place that we can be at. As far as kind of moving the needle forward, if you will, about preparedness and getting a seat at the table, I think that is something that WCK is working towards, being able to share, how we stay prepared and stay nimble, and how we can change that roadmap a little bit.
Yeah, and I'll just say, we have, with our staff a little bit larger, we have people that can move around and do these things. So we have been participating in things like there's a annual conference where all the kind of governors from likely hurricane states come together and gather. We've had a presence there. We're very kind of transparent and willing to share, what has worked and what hasn't worked. So yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. And internationally, it's really interesting because there are some countries that we're ready to support, but will likely not need us.
And we had a wildfires. And I remember opening that box and thinking, wow, and then tasting it, and then, wow, it was several notches above anything else that I've ever received. So ever after that, whenever they came through the door, it was a bright spot in my day, that knowing that we would have delicious, and really the recipes, I can't, with the flavors, and it's not normal food. It was very special. And my question is, I'm interested in the logistics of like food supply, guaranteeing food supply in conflict zones, and how maybe you have some stories of and how you've done that and what kind of obstacles you've overcome.
Sure. Yeah. We have someone in the audience who might be able to speak to that. I think I saw him, but that's when sourcing locally becomes even more important, right? Because if there's a conflict, like importation and exportation is probably like really stalled. So that is like knowing how to do that, I think becomes even more important. I have not been a part of those conversations. We have a full team, like that's their whole job. And actually, some of my Chef Corps members have been helpful for that recently. We are currently in Egypt and other places in that broader region, feeding anybody that we can. And a couple of my Chef Corps members who are based in the U.S. but have family there connected us with their uncles who own restaurants, and they told us who their suppliers are. So it's not any different really than a natural disaster. We're still using the same tools in our toolbox of going to locals and saying, who do you know? Anything to add, Molly?
I would just say conflict zone or kind of not conflict zone, supply chain is always up for question, because whether it is your roads are swept away with water or your truck is, I hate to use this word, hijacked by somebody who was not meant to be getting that, there will always be kind of some hurdles that WCK and just about anybody during a time of disaster or stress has to go through. So sometimes it's a little bit different for us, depending upon, again, if we're working completely locally or if we are working kind of on a more broader scale. But there is always still hurdles to jump through. And like Laura said, that's why working really with local and having the least amount of distance to travel is always the best. When we were in Turkey, one of our 7 field kitchens was having a really hard time procuring protein. It just, every time we thought we had it, we just didn't. So to be frank, I got a phone call one day from one of my chefs that was running the kitchen up there, and she goes, "Chef, I think I made a really big mistake." And I go, "Did you lose some more protein?" She goes, "No, I bought 4 cows. They are all... I bought 4 cows. I asked for 400 kilos of something, and they showed up with 4 cows." I go, "It's cold. Slaughter those cows because you are going to need it." So
Yeah.
To be honest, sometimes the harder things turn into the bright lights and the humor that we need that just makes it go. So.
And sorry, real quick, one thing I'd be remiss not to say is we also work with partners around the world. So right now, we are feeding people in Gaza, but that's not because World Central Kitchen has boots on the ground in Gaza. That's because we're working with an organization called ANERA. And so they were already in Gaza before this conflict escalated. And so, they could source things right around them, and they did. And so we work with partners like that at other places that are harder for us to be. We've been feeding after earthquake in Afghanistan, also through these partners, and so they have their own local supply chains that we can rely on and support them in whatever best way we can, and then we kind of work together. So.
Thank you. I think we have time for one final question over there, please.
Hi, my name is Alethea Irwin, and I'm kind of interested in the food, the climate, the community thing, and when you do predictive things. So you said when you showed up in Korea, they said, "We got this." But do you have a team that's their job, where they predict like where the next, they can't predict the wars, at least we hope they can't. But where they can predict like that's just going to be a hurricane or there's going to be flooding or
So yes, we do have a team that monitors. And some things are a little bit easier to monitor than others, i.e. hurricanes. We can monitor kind of their pattern, if you will, and as it's starting to increase or decrease, also depending upon where it's going to hit, what that population looks like, if historically it's been hit by a hurricane. In 2020 in Central America, Eta and Iota were two back-to-back Category 4 hurricanes that were within like 4 days of one another. So we tracked the first one, didn't realize there was going to be a second one, but we were already on the ground. So we were able to kind of work down and then work back up because it was two such large hurricanes back to back. Same thing with Madagascar during cyclone season. They hadn't, this area of Madagascar hadn't had a cyclone in 20 years. Then they got 5 in 1 year. It was the most, one of the most horrific cyclone seasons they've had in about 20 years. We were there for one, and then before we knew it, there was another one. So we do have team members that really all they do is kind of look at the news, look at the weather, and just see how things are coming through. But like you said, we cannot predict man-made disaster or war, unfortunately. If we could, maybe the world would be a little bit of a better place. We could stop it before it starts. But as far as natural disasters go, things like hurricanes, and when hurricane season is, the West Coast fires, we're looking into what's going to be maybe blizzard season coming up. To see how snowfall is going to affect regions where we maybe haven't gone before.
Y'all, we responded to a snowstorm emergency in Southern California this year. It's just
crazy.
That's where we're at.
It'll continue to be unpredictable. Well, thank you. I'm afraid we have arrived at time with this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for the work you do, for being here. Before joining me in a round of applause, please join Chef Molly Kaufman. She'll be signing books at the back of the auditorium over there. Reminder to please join the Food History Project's newsletter. Please complete the survey cards that are on your chairs. And please join us tomorrow for more Smithsonian Food History Weekend. Tomorrow we will start at 12:30 with the Cooking History Program, Climate, Chiles, and Change in Hatch Valley, New Mexico, featuring Chef Patty Hinch and Andrea Alvarez. So now please join me in thanking these wonderful and brave women. Thank you.